Okay, so that's great. We now have our game mode ready for use in the project. So all this lecture will be is a very short setup of adding the BP game mode, so it is the game mode which is used. And the reason that I've set this as its own lecture rather than just appending it to the end of the previous lecture is because this is one of the things that when I first started out with Unreal I would always forget to set up, because I'd always seen it in that way. It always was kind of a slightly less important thing left until the end of the video, and it would just quickly be plugged in. Nothing would really be said about that. So then when I forgot to do that, things like my players weren't coming in at the right position or the right player wasn't coming in. I was wondering why the general functionality wasn't working, and it's purely because I'd forgotten to change this option here. So we now have our game mode ready. We're going to go over to our project settings. We'll go down to our maps and modes if you don't already have that selected, and we just want to change the default game mode to be our game mode. So this wasn't here before. We now have our BP game mode opposed to just game mode. So if we select that, we'll also see that all of this changes from a dark grey to the lighter grey, which allows us to drop down these options and choose different things. Now, as it stands, we have nothing to choose. We haven't yet made our character, so we don't have a pawn to put in here. We don't have a default HUD system or anything like this. But this sets us up, and but this does set us up and allow us to quickly drop these in as and when we create them, and we'll come back to this quite regularly and update it as and when we need. But the main thing is that for now we have the default game mode set to BP game mode, or whatever you've chosen to call your game mode when you were going along in the previous lecture. So as I said, nice and simple, very quick, but I did feel that's important enough to warrant its own lecture rather than just being tagged on to the end of the previous one. So now if we press play, in fact, we'll get exactly the same thing. We're still expecting that because we can turn around and we can see the default pawn is still there because we haven't changed it. So I'll wrap that very short lecture up there, and I'll see you in the next.